In today's module, we're going to be talking about root certificates versus pinned certificates. And what is the difference between the two? And when would you use one over the other? Now, before we get started here, if we just look at the words root and pinned, we can already see there's some immediate differences here. Root sounds a lot more formal, whereas pinned sounds a little bit more casual. And there is some kind of truth to this here as we dive a little bit more deeper, right? So let's get started first of all. So really a root certificate is in actual fact a digital certificate here, okay? And this is issued by a certificate authority, right? And basically what's actually happening here is we're establishing a trust in the certificate authority that issued it, right? And what we're here doing with digital certificates is that it's the foundation of the certificate chain of trust model, right? So this root certificate that we have here is actually in fact trusted by the browser, the operating system, and the network infrastructure, right? And the root certificate is installed inside the actual trust store. Now, the trust store has a collection of trusted root certificates. There's just typically not one root server, but there's many. And it's preloaded in the browser or the applications to validate the SSL or TLS connection that we're making to the web server. So now, in contrast, let's look at a PIN certificate, right? And in many ways, when we talk about PIN certificates, it's most often associated with the phrase forget and actually, you forget it and you kind of like put it away, right? And that's kind of a mentality around PIN certificate. And you'll see why that is, right? So really a PIN certificate is not a digital cert. So that's the biggest difference, right? Instead, it's actually a security measure that's used to authenticate the client-server communication, right? So as part of that TLS connection that goes to the web server and then kind of comes back, the web server is actually going to provide a certificate along with the public key. And what's actually happening here is that the actual PIN certificate is going to authenticate the server's TLS certificate, right, against its a known copy, which is the actual PIN certificate. And that's how it's validating. That's how it's ensuring that what's being sent back from the web server is in actual fact what it's supposed to be, right? Now, how do we pin the certificate? So in the root certificate, we know that it goes into the trust door. Now, what with the PIN certificate, it's a little bit different, right? So we're not putting the PIN certificate into the trust door because technically it's not a digital certificate. Instead, what we're actually doing is actually we're pinning the certificate to the we're actually pinning the certificate to the root certificate inside the trust door, okay, and hence where the word pinning actually comes from. So why do we pin a certificate, right? So really we're pinning a certificate so that where there isn't a man in the middle attack in that TLS connection, right? It's ensuring that the app or the web server will accept the cert that is programmed to do so, right? Is to validate that, right? And when we look at in terms of the actual pinning of the actual root certificate, it's very easy here, right? For example, on a Windows machine, it's a simple command line option, and you can specify some parameters, and you can get that installed there, right? So pinning of the actual certificate is an easy process here, right? Now, the next question here is, what do we use, pin certificates and a root certificate, right? And the actual easiest answer to that is really when we look at pin certificate, this is a very much an old, it's a legacy process, right? And the reason why I say that is because today, certificate authorities are making a lot of frequent changes to certificates, okay? and these certificates are also being rotated more frequently. So in the olden days, you know, that forget kind of mentality, install and kind of forget mentality doesn't scale today because of that, the agile nature, the frequency of how we are rotating certificates today. Because the more often as you rotate a certificate, the PIN certificate has to be updated, because otherwise, when you're getting back that certificate from a web server or an application and you're verifying it, you may be verifying against an old, stale PIN certificate, right? So that's an important thing here, right? And also something else to kind of keep in mind here is, the other major reason why PIN certificate is not working is certificate authorities themselves not only are making frequent changes, but the shelf life of these certificates are much more shorter. So just kind of thinking, like 5 years ago, an average certificate life was, 96 months or something like that. And then if you look at it fast forward today, you're looking at 1 year. And even Google, with Google Chrome, is even pushing for even shorter time frames, right? In which the certificate, the intermediate, or the actual various elements of that is actually even being brought down even further, and they're even advocating for something like 3 months, right? So you can see that there's a lot of dynamic nature of actually the rotations aspects. And for that reason, my own thoughts are PIN certificate is not recommended. This is an old way of doing things, right? That concludes today's module. Thank you.